War is a crucible. It burns away assumptions, theories, and plans, leaving only the hard, brutal truth of what works and what fails. In the jungles of Vietnam, a generation of American soldiers would discover this truth with a rifle in their hands. It was a weapon born of aerospace engineering and California sunshine. Sleek, lightweight, made of aluminum and plastic. It looked like something from a science fiction film, a stark contrast to the traditional wood and steel firearms that had dominated battlefields for centuries. It was supposed to be the future of warfare, a tool that would give the American soldier an unmatched advantage in a new kind of conflict. But in the suffocating heat of battle, in the mud and the monsoon rains, the future malfunctioned. The rifle that was meant to save lives became a death sentence for hundreds, perhaps thousands, of young men. It was a marvel of innovation and a catastrophic failure, a symbol of American genius and a testament to the deadly consequences of hubris and bureaucracy. This is the story of that weapon. A rifle that divided generals, betrayed soldiers, and ultimately transformed the modern battlefield. A piece of technology that carries the weight of victory, the bitterness of defeat, and the blood of a generation. This is the story of America's first assault rifle, the M16. The story of the M16 doesn't begin on a battlefield. It begins in the heart of the American military-industrial complex during the nervous peace of the Cold War. The Second World War had ended, but the lessons it taught were etched into the mind of every military planner. That war was won with industrial might, but also with revolutionary weapons. The German Sturmgewehr 44, the world's first true assault rifle, had shown a new path forward. It combined the rapid fire of a submachine gun with the range and power of a rifle, firing a new type of intermediate cartridge. It had changed the face of infantry combat on the Eastern Front, allowing German soldiers to lay down a devastating volume of controllable automatic fire. After World War II, the United States military was, to put it mildly, comfortable. They had the M1 Garand, which General George S. Patton had famously called the greatest battle implement ever devised. It was reliable, powerful, and it had won the war. The problem was, warfare was changing. The Garand fired a massive .30-06 Springfield round, a cartridge designed for the long-range trench warfare of World War I, for shooting across vast open fields. It had tremendous range and stopping power, but the rifle itself was heavy, held only 8 rounds in an en-bloc clip that made a distinctive ping when ejected, potentially alerting the enemy that the soldier was reloading. It was ill-suited for the kind of close-quarters, high-volume firefights that were becoming more common. The Soviets understood this shift perfectly. Their AK-47, which appeared in 1949, was a direct response to the German STG-44 and a game-changer in its own right. It used a smaller intermediate cartridge, the 7.62 by 39 mm round, which allowed a soldier to carry much more ammunition. It was fully automatic, incredibly simple to use with its long-stroke gas piston system, and legendarily reliable due to its loose tolerances. It was a weapon for a new kind of war, designed for conscript armies and harsh conditions. The American military establishment, however, was slow to adapt. They were still in love with the idea of the marksman, the single, well-aimed shot that could take down an enemy at 500 yards or more. This was the cult of the marksman, a deeply ingrained belief that American soldiers were inherently better shots and that firepower should always prioritize power and range over volume. Their answer to the AK-47 was the M14 rifle. It was a compromise, an attempt to blend the old world with the new. It was essentially an M1 Garand updated with a 20-round detachable magazine and the ability to fire in full auto. It fired the powerful new 7.62 by 51 mm NATO round, a cartridge nearly as powerful as the old .30-06. But in practice, the M14 was a beast. On full auto, it was so difficult to control that it was described as trying to hold onto a roaring jackhammer. Most M14s were eventually issued with the selector switch locked to semi-automatic, defeating the purpose of an automatic rifle. It was long, heavy at almost 10 pounds, and the ammunition was bulky. An American soldier could carry perhaps 100 rounds. His Soviet counterpart, with an AK-47, could easily carry 3 times that. The Ordnance Corps, the powerful, conservative branch of the Army responsible for weapons development, was satisfied. But some forward thinkers saw disaster on the horizon. The revolution would come not from the halls of the Pentagon, but from a tiny, innovative company in Hollywood, California, called Armalite. Armalite was a subsidiary of the Fairchild Engine and Airplane Corporation, and its mission was to develop firearms using modern aerospace materials and manufacturing techniques. It was here that the seeds of the M16 were sown by a man who was not a classically trained gunsmith, but a brilliant, self-taught engineer who had spent the war working on aircraft cannons. His name was Eugene Stoner. Stoner wasn't a gun guy in the traditional sense. He didn't grow up idolizing John Browning or Peter Paul Mauser. He was an aviation guy. He thought in terms of aluminum alloys, advanced plastics, and lightweight, efficient systems. He looked at a rifle not as a piece of milled steel and wood, but as a machine. And like any good engineer, he wanted to make it lighter, more efficient, and easier to produce. His philosophy was one of elegance and simplicity in function, using cutting-edge materials to achieve his goals. In 1955, Armalite tasked Stoner with designing a next-generation combat rifle. His creation, the AR-10, was a revelation. It fired the same powerful 7.62 mm cartridge as the M14, but it weighed almost 2 pounds less. Stoner threw out the traditional wood and heavy steel. He used forged 7075 T6 aluminum for the receivers, a material common in aircraft construction, and fiberglass-infused plastic for the stock, pistol grip, and handguards. Its profile was sleek and linear, with the sights raised on an integrated carrying handle. This inline design directed the recoil straight back into the shooter's shoulder, dramatically reducing muzzle climb during firing. Most importantly, he used a revolutionary new operating system. Instead of the heavy gas piston used in the M1 Garand and the AK-47, Stoner's design siphoned hot gas from the barrel through a thin, stainless steel tube and vented it directly into a chamber inside the bolt carrier group. This gas pushed the bolt carrier backward to cycle the action. This direct impingement system was lightweight, had fewer moving parts, and contributed to the rifle's impressive accuracy by not having a heavy piston shifting its weight during the firing cycle. The AR-10 was a masterpiece of design. It was years ahead of its time. When Armalite submitted it for the trials to replace the M1 Garand, it outperformed the competition, including the T-44, which would become the M14, in many respects. It was lighter, more controllable in automatic fire, and more accurate. But it had one fatal flaw in the eyes of the establishment. It was new. It was radical. The Army Ordnance Corps was an old boys' club, deeply invested in their own designs at the Springfield Armory. They were skeptical of the aluminum, the plastic, the space-age look. Then, during a torture test, an experimental aluminum-steel composite barrel on one prototype burst. That was the excuse they needed. They declared the AR-10 unsafe and chose the familiar, conservative design they had helped develop, the M14. The AR-10 was a commercial failure. Armalite, on the verge of bankruptcy, sold the rights to the design to Colt's Manufacturing Company in 1959. For most designers, this would have been the end of the story. But a new idea was taking hold within the military, an idea driven by data and combat analysis. It was called Project Salvo. Studies conducted by the Army's Operations Research Office concluded that in modern combat, most firefights happened at ranges under 300 meters, and what mattered most was hitting the target. A higher volume of lighter projectiles, they argued, would result in more hits than a smaller number of heavy ones. What soldiers needed wasn't a sledgehammer, but a scalpel. They needed a lightweight rifle firing a small-caliber, high-velocity round. Such a weapon would allow soldiers to carry far more ammunition, fire with greater control, and inflict devastating wounds. The science behind this was revolutionary. A small, lightweight bullet traveling at over 3,000 feet per second would be stable in the air, but upon hitting the soft tissue of a human body, it would destabilize, tumble, and fragment, causing catastrophic damage far disproportionate to its size. General Willard G. Wyman, commander of the Continental Army Command, was intrigued by this research. In 1957, he asked Eugene Stoner to scale down his AR-10 to fire a new, revolutionary cartridge, the .223 Remington, a civilian cartridge based on a popular varmint hunting round. The result was the Armalite AR-15. It looked almost identical to the AR-10, but smaller, sleeker, and lighter. It weighed just over 6 pounds. When soldiers and testers first saw it, they couldn't believe it. It felt like a toy. After years of handling 10-pound M1s and M14s, this thing felt like it would just float away. It was so light, so pointable. The recoil was negligible. You could put a whole magazine into a target on full auto and keep most of the shots on paper. It was a completely different philosophy of shooting. Colt, now owning the design, began an aggressive marketing campaign. In a now infamous demonstration on July 4, 1960, a Colt salesman put on a show for the cigar-chomping Air Force General Curtis LeMay. LeMay was a powerful and controversial figure, the architect of America's strategic bombing campaigns in World War II and a firm believer in technological superiority. The salesman fired AR-15s at a row of watermelons. LeMay, deeply impressed by the explosive effect of the high-velocity 5.56 mm rounds, immediately ordered 8,500 rifles for the Air Force Security Police to replace their aging M2 carbines. But the Army Ordnance Corps was furious. They saw the AR-15 as a direct threat to their beloved M14, which had only just entered full production after a long and costly development. They ran a series of bias tests designed to make the AR-15 fail, claiming it wasn't accurate enough, powerful enough, or durable enough for the rigors of combat. The resistance was incredible. They derisively called it a poodle shooter. They said it looked like a toy from the Mattel Toy Company. There was this deep-seated cultural belief in the Army that a real soldier's rifle had to be heavy, made of steel and wood, and fire a cannon-like cartridge. The AR-15 offended their sensibilities. It was a battle of tradition versus innovation, and tradition was winning. But a new conflict was brewing in a small, faraway country in Southeast Asia. It was a war that would be fought not in the open fields of Europe, but in the dense, suffocating jungle. And in the jungle, the M14's weaknesses would become glaringly, fatally obvious. The stage was set for the AR-15, now designated the M16, to prove itself. It would be a trial by fire. As America's involvement in Vietnam deepened, the limitations of its existing arsenal became painfully clear. The M14 was simply too long and heavy for the dense jungle terrain. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army, equipped with a rugged and compact AK-47, often had the advantage in close-quarters ambushes. The jungle rendered the M14's long-range power almost useless. Most engagements were happening within 50 meters. What you needed was volume of fire. You needed a lighter weapon and the ability to carry hundreds of rounds of ammunition. South Vietnamese troops, known as the ARVN, were struggling with the heavy M1 Garands and M14s they were given. In 1962, the Pentagon's Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA, sent 1,000 AR-15s to South Vietnam for field testing with ARVN troops. The reports that came back were glowing. South Vietnamese soldiers loved the rifle. It was light enough for their smaller stature, and its low recoil made it easy to control. One report was particularly dramatic. In a firefight, a team of AR-15 equipped soldiers had killed 5 Viet Cong guerrillas. Post-mortem examinations revealed horrific, devastating wounds, confirming the lethality of the 5.56 mm round. The reports were exactly what Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara wanted to hear. McNamara was a former Ford Motor Company executive, one of the whiz kids, who believed that any problem could be solved with data, efficiency, and systems analysis. He saw the M16 as a superior system, and he had little patience for the Army's traditionalist arguments. Overruling the Army's passionate objections, he ordered a halt to M14 production in 1963 and pushed for the adoption of the M16 as the military's standard service rifle. The top brass was forced to accept it, but they never liked it. And that resentment had consequences. Fatal consequences. They saw the rifle as Stoner and Colt's baby, not theirs. So when it came time to write the final specifications for mass production, the Army made a few small, seemingly insignificant changes. Changes they thought were improvements, but which would turn a revolutionary rifle into a disaster. The first change was to the ammunition. Eugene Stoner had designed the M16 to use a specific type of ammunition loaded with IMR, or improved military rifle, smokeless powder. It was an extruded, stick-like propellant that was stable and clean-burning. But the Army's specifications called for a different powder, ball propellant. It was a small, spherical powder that was cheaper to produce and, because it was denser, allowed for higher chamber pressures, increasing the bullet's velocity. But it also burned much dirtier, leaving behind a thick, hard carbon residue that fouled the rifle's tight tolerances. It also increased the cyclic rate of the rifle from a manageable 750 rounds per minute to a blistering 1,000 rounds per minute, putting extra stress on its components. The second decision was a matter of doctrine and cost-cutting. The Army Ordnance Corps had a long-standing belief that if you gave a soldier the means to adjust his weapon, he would inevitably mess it up. Stoner's original design, and the rifles the Air Force had adopted, included a chrome-plated chamber and barrel. Chrome lining is a crucial feature in a military rifle. It creates a very hard, slick surface that protects the steel from corrosion and makes it much harder for residue to stick, which dramatically eases the extraction of spent cartridge cases. The Army, in a move to save a few dollars per rifle, eliminated the chrome lining. The final, and perhaps most catastrophic, decision was one of marketing and ignorance. Colt, in its early sales pitches to an Air Force that valued clean, high-tech systems, had billed the AR-15 as a self-cleaning rifle that required minimal maintenance. It was a dangerous exaggeration. The Army took them at their word. The first M16s were shipped to Vietnam without cleaning kits, without cleaning instructions, and without the soldiers being told that their lives depended on keeping the weapon immaculate. When the first large American combat units, like the 1st Cavalry Division, arrived in Vietnam in 1965, they carried the M16. At first, the rifle performed as advertised. But then, the fighting intensified. The environment, the 100-degree heat, the 100% humidity, the mud, the incessant rain, began to take its toll. And the problems started. A soldier's letter home: "Dear Mom and Dad, we were in a big fight yesterday. My new M16 rifle is a piece of junk. It keeps jamming. Almost everyone's rifle is jamming. We are all scared to death of these rifles. The only good thing is that the VC are scared of it too, when it works. I traded my rifle with a dead man's M14. I feel safer now." The malfunction was almost always the same: a failure to extract. A spent cartridge case would get stuck in the chamber after firing. The bolt would then try to ram a new round in behind it, creating a hopeless jam. The only way to clear it was to force a cleaning rod down the barrel and knock the stuck case out, an impossible task in the middle of a firefight. It was the perfect storm of failures. The dirty ball powder was leaving a thick cake of carbon fouling in the chamber. The lack of chrome lining meant the steel chamber was rougher and more prone to corrosion, giving that fouling something to stick to. The hot, humid climate of Vietnam caused the brass cartridge cases to expand more than expected. So you had a dirty, sticky chamber and an overexpanded casing. It was practically glued in there after firing. For the soldiers on the ground, the technical reasons were irrelevant. All they knew was that their rifles were failing them at the worst possible moment. The sleek, black weapon they had been promised as their savior was now their greatest liability. A Marine's diary entry, May 21, 1967. We left 3 dead Marines on the hill yesterday. All 3 died with their rifles broken down beside them. The platoon sergeant is furious. He says we were sent to fight with a defective weapon. He says it's murder. The reports of failures grew from a trickle to a flood. But the Army command in Saigon and the Pentagon were in denial. They blamed the soldiers, accusing them of not cleaning their weapons properly. Weapons they were never issued cleaning kits for. The official line was that there were no major issues with the M16. It was a massive institutional cover-up. The M16 was Robert McNamara's pet project. The Army had been forced to adopt it. For the military leadership to admit that the rifle was a catastrophic failure would have been a huge embarrassment. It would have meant admitting that the politicians and systems analysts were wrong, and the old, traditionalist ordnance officers were right. So they buried the reports. But the truth couldn't be buried forever. Frustrated soldiers began writing letters to their parents, their girlfriends, and their congressmen. The stories were horrifying. Men being overrun because their squad's firepower was cut in half by jammed rifles. Soldiers found dead, a cleaning rod still in their hand, killed in the act of trying to fix the weapon that had failed them. In May of 1967, a congressional subcommittee led by Representative Richard Ichord of Missouri launched an investigation. They traveled to Vietnam, interviewed soldiers on the front lines, and uncovered the damning truth. Their final report was a scathing indictment of the Army Ordnance Corps. It cited the unauthorized change in gunpowder, the failure to chrome-line the barrels, and the shocking lack of cleaning supplies and training. The report landed like a bombshell. The public was outraged. Under immense pressure, the Pentagon was finally forced to act. The M16 project was taken away from the Army and handed to a dedicated task force. Their mission was simple: fix the rifle and do it now. The result was the M16A1. The most critical change was the immediate reintroduction of the chrome-plated chamber and, later, the full barrel. This simple fix made the chamber resistant to corrosion and fouling, drastically reducing the number of extraction failures. A new, heavier buffer was designed to slow the cyclic rate of fire back down to its original specification, making the rifle more controllable and reliable. Ammunition was now loaded with cleaner burning powders. And, crucially, massive shipments of cleaning kits were sent to Vietnam. To make sure every soldier understood the importance of maintenance, the Army even commissioned the famous cartoonist Will Eisner to create a comic book-style instruction manual, featuring a character named Corporal Joe Dope who learned the hard way how to care for his rifle. They also added the forward assist. It's that little plunger on the side of the receiver. Stoner hated it. He thought it was a crude fix for a problem that shouldn't exist if the rifle was made correctly. He called it a bolt closer. The idea was, if a round failed to seat properly because of dirt or fouling, the soldier could smack the forward assist to force the bolt closed. In reality, it probably caused as many problems as it solved, because you could end up forcing a round into a dirty chamber it would never come out of. But it gave the soldiers psychological comfort. It was something they could do. By late 1967 and early 1968, the improved M16A1, along with proper training and maintenance, was finally in the hands of the troops. The rifle that Eugene Stoner had designed was at last being used as he had intended. The question was, had the changes come too late? Had the M16's reputation been shattered beyond repair? The answer would come in the bloodiest fighting of the war, during the Tet Offensive. Redemption is earned in battle. For the M16, that moment came during the Tet Offensive of 1968. In a massive, coordinated assault, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces attacked cities and bases across South Vietnam. The fighting was brutal, close quarters, and relentless. It was the ultimate test for the newly improved M16A1. And this time, the rifle worked. The iconic rival of the M16 was Mikhail Kalashnikov's AK-47. The two rifles represented entirely different design philosophies. The AK was built for ultimate reliability, designed for a conscript army that might not perform perfect maintenance. It was a loose, overgassed system, with generous tolerances that allowed it to function even when clogged with sand, mud, or carbon. It was, in essence, a triumph of industrial-age simplicity. But this reliability came at a cost. All those loose tolerances and its violent action make it less accurate, especially at longer ranges. It fires a heavier, slower 7.62 by 39 mm round, which has a more pronounced trajectory drop. It's a fantastic infantry weapon, but not a precise one. The M16A1, by contrast, was a product of the aerospace age. It was a precision instrument. Tightly machined, with a more complex operating system, it demanded care and constant maintenance. But in return, it offered superior performance. With the A1, once the soldier trusted it, he could do amazing things. The 5.56 round is incredibly fast, over 3,000 feet per second. That means it has a very flat trajectory. It's a point-and-shoot weapon out to 300 meters. An American GI could aim dead-on at a target and hit it, while an NVA soldier with an AK had to account for bullet drop. The M16 was lighter, the ammo was lighter, the recoil was minimal. It was, simply put, a more lethal and accurate rifle in the hands of a well-trained soldier. A veteran's reflection. After Tet, things changed. We got the new rifles, the A1S, and we finally got cleaning kits. Our sergeants were religious about it. You cleaned your rifle before you ate, before you slept. It became part of you. And a funny thing happened. It started working. You'd pull the trigger and it would go bang, every time. The trust came back. And with that trust you could fight. You could really fight. The tactical implications were profound. The M16A1 changed the way American squads operated. The sheer volume of accurate, controllable fire a squad could produce was overwhelming. The term base of fire became central to U.S. infantry doctrine. Some soldiers with M16s would lay down a withering wall of suppressive fire, pinning the enemy down, while others maneuvered to flank them. The M16 allowed for a new level of tactical agility. A soldier carrying an M16A1 with 200 rounds was carrying less weight than a soldier with an M14 and 100 rounds. That meant he could move faster, for longer. It shifted the philosophy from slow, deliberate marksmanship to speed, volume of fire, and maneuverability. This is the core of modern infantry tactics, and it was born in Vietnam with the M16. The psychological impact was just as important. The distinctive sound of the M16, a high-pitched, rapid crack, 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 became a symbol of American firepower. For the enemy, it was the sound of a hornet's nest. For the American GI, it was the sound of support, of survival. You could tell who was who just by the sound. The AK had this deep, slow thump. The M16 had that incredibly high cyclic rate, like ripping a piece of canvas. When you were in a tight spot and you heard that sound coming from your flank, you knew your buddies were there. It was the sound of the cavalry coming. By the end of the war, the M16A1 had earned a begrudging, but solid respect. The weapon that had once been a source of terror and betrayal for American troops was now a trusted partner. It had been forged in the crucible of combat, its flaws burned away by failure and blood. It had survived its troubled birth and had been redeemed. But its story was far from over. The rifle's influence would soon spread far beyond the jungles of Vietnam. The Vietnam War ended, but the M16 endured. It had become the standard by which all other assault rifles were measured. But like any successful technology, it continued to evolve. The long jungles of Vietnam were replaced by the open deserts of the Middle East and the tight urban corridors of modern warfare. The rifle had to adapt. In the 1980s, the Marine Corps led the charge to improve the M16. The result was the M16A2. It was designed to address the lessons learned not just in Vietnam, but in training exercises around the world. They switched to a barrel with a faster 1 in 7-inch twist rate to stabilize a new, heavier 5.56 mm NATO standard round, the M855, which offered better range and penetration against body armor. They also replaced the fully automatic setting with a 3-round burst mechanism. The theory was that this would conserve ammunition and increase accuracy for poorly trained soldiers. Whether it was a good idea is still debated today, but it shows how the military was trying to refine the weapon into a more versatile platform. But the biggest evolution came from the need for a more compact weapon. The 20-inch barrel of the M16 was excellent for open country, but it was clumsy when getting in and out of armored personnel carriers or clearing rooms in urban combat. The answer was the M4 carbine. The M4 is basically a shortened M16, featuring a collapsible stock and a 14.5-inch barrel. It became the standard issue rifle for most of the U.S. military in the post-9/11 era. That shorter barrel causes some issues: lower muzzle velocity, a louder muzzle blast, and it puts more stress on the direct impingement system, but its handiness is undeniable. It's the logical endpoint of Stoner's original vision: a lightweight, modular, and ergonomic weapon system. The modularity of Stoner's design became its greatest strength. The invention of the Picatinny rail system, a series of standardized slots on the rifle, turned the M16 and M4 into a true platform. Soldiers could now easily attach a vast array of accessories: scopes, red dot sights, night vision, grenade launchers, lasers, and foregrips. The rifle became endlessly customizable to the specific mission and the individual user. This modularity was driven largely by the needs of Special Operations Command, or SOCOM, who wanted rifles that could be adapted for any situation imaginable. The M16 platform became a global phenomenon. Colt and other manufacturers exported variants to over 80 countries. It became the rifle of America's allies, from NATO forces in Europe to elite units in Israel and South Korea. To this day, it remains one of the most prolific and recognizable firearms in the world. But the rifle's legacy has a second, more controversial chapter. While the M16 was a select-fire military weapon, its semi-automatic-only civilian version, the AR-15, became one of the most popular and polarizing firearms in American history. The AR-15 is, for all intents and purposes, a civilian M16 that only fires one shot per trigger pull. Because of its military heritage, its accuracy, its low recoil, and its modularity, it became known as America's rifle to shooting enthusiasts. But to its detractors, its menacing military appearance makes it a symbol of gun violence. It's frequently, and often incorrectly, labeled an assault weapon in the political debate. The AR-15 sits at the very epicenter of the American gun control controversy. The rifle Eugene Stoner designed for soldiers in a distant war had come home, becoming a cultural flashpoint. Its sleek, black profile is now as common in news reports about tragic mass shootings as it is in images of American soldiers overseas. It is a symbol of freedom and sport to some, and a symbol of violence and death to others. From the jungles of Vietnam to the streets of America, the story of the M16 is the story of a technology that escaped its original purpose. It shaped battlefields, influenced global politics, and ignited a fierce debate about the very nature of weapons and society. It is a legacy of innovation, controversy, and bloodshed. A weapon is more than just a tool. It's a repository of history. It carries the echoes of the battles it was fought in, the hopes of the engineers who designed it, and the fears of the soldiers who carried it. Few weapons carry as much weight as the M16. It was born from a brilliant vision of a future war fought with lightweight, advanced technology. It was rushed into service with fatal flaws, a product of bureaucratic arrogance and neglect. It became a symbol of failure in a war America was struggling to win. The M16 story is a cautionary tale. It shows that the most advanced technology in the world is useless, even dangerous, if it's not properly tested, and if the end users are not properly trained. It was a lesson the U.S. military learned in the most painful way imaginable. But it was also a story of redemption, of learning from mistakes, of adapting, and of ultimately creating a weapon that served American soldiers for over half a century. It became the foundation for the rifles that are still used today, a testament to the fundamental brilliance of Eugene Stoner's original design. In the end, it was a good rifle. A damn good rifle. It just had a real hard time being born. The M16 is a mirror, reflecting the best and worst of the American war machine. Its story is one of genius and hubris, of battlefield tragedy and hard-won triumph. Born in controversy, tested in blood, and perfected by war, the M16 was more than a rifle. It was America's violent, complicated, and revolutionary first step into the future of warfare.